So we're going to start with our sponsors for the week. Rabbi Aaron Koslasi remains our sponsor for this week. For the refuah shem of Gracia Ba Misoda, his mother, and Hadra Bat Esther, his mother-in-law, and an Aliyas Neshama for Nechem Yisrael, Meir Ben Malka. Shama Shavaliyah, and a Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by Dan Stern in honor of Rabbi and Rebbetzin Avraham and Rachel Gislason. So we are now at the Mishnah, Daf Chaf, Amud Aleph. Back to the king. Mace lo mace. If a king has a relative who dies, Eino yotzmi pesach palterin, so he should not leave his palace. Rabbi Yehuda says, Imrotzel acharamita yotze, he can, if he wants to, go after the funeral procession. She came out seen David because we see David HaMelech did that, right? That's a proof. David HaMelech did it in Navi. Sheyotza acharmita social Avner, the story of Avner ben Ner, and David HaMelech goes out in the funeral procession of Avner ben Ner. The story of Avner ben Ner is that David, after Shaul dies, goes to Hebron and he becomes the Melech, he becomes the king of Yehuda in Hebron. Meanwhile, Ishbosheth becomes the king of Yisrael, supported by Ishbosheth, who is by Avner ben Ner. Avner ben Ner is the general of Shaul, and David Melech has his general Yoav. During some battles, Yoav's brother Asael is killed by Avner during a battle. And so after about 7.5 years that David is in Hebron, Avner realizes that it's time for everybody to make peace. Let's get everybody together. And he's orchestrating peace agreements. He's going back and forth with David and sending the peace agreements around. And so in one of their conversations, in order to finalize this peace agreement, Avner is coming to David and Yoav comes to meet him and Yoav assassinates him. And he's doing it out of vengeance as a Goel Hadam for his brother Asael, who was killed earlier in war. And David Melech is furious. He never really forgives Yoav, although Yoav remains his general for some time. When eventually Shlomo takes over as king, he tells Shlomo, remember to get even with Yoav, and Shlomo does, in fact, hunt Shlomo down. Another story. But in the meantime, Avner got killed, and David HaMelech attended the funeral. Shenamer as the pasuk says, "V'amelech David holich achar mita." The king David went after the burial proceedings, after the whatever you call it, the procession. Thank you, that's the word. Amar le lo hayadavar ella lefayis. He goes, that was not because really kings should be able to do that. It's just that the nation was upset. In fact, they felt that David potentially was complicit in this assassination, and they were wary. Here you had this peace agreement, and then the chief negotiator for the opposition suddenly gets killed. The general of the other side gets killed. Well, the people were wary, and they thought that David HaMelech had orchestrated it, considering Yoav was the one who did it, and potentially that would have continued the division between Yehuda and Yisrael, and David HaMelech is trying to be able to gather everybody together, so therefore he made a special effort to be visible at the funeral, despite the fact that normally kings should not. When we are visiting a king who is in mourning, so then the whole nation sits on the ground, and he sits on a dargish. We're going to see what a dargish is.
Of the land, right?
On the ground, yes. On al haaretz, on the ground. Says the Gemara, if the custom was for women to go into the funeral procession, that is fine. Lifnei amita yotzos, if they go on the behind. In other words, the funeral procession has two parts: the part that's in front of the casket, the part that's behind the casket. Sometimes the custom was the women went first, sometimes the women went behind. It was more modest for the women to go behind, because then the men who are following see the women up front. But funerals are not really the most the most festive of occasions that people would notice the ladies up front. So if the custom was that the ladies would go front, that was fine. If the custom were the ladies were going in behind, that's also fine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi says, "Liolam noshim lifnei hamita yotzos." Really, the ladies are supposed to go before in front. Why? Shekain matzinu beDavid she'achar hamita social Avner, because we see that in the story of David and Avner, that as we're describing that funeral procession, David goes after the funeral procession. He goes after the casket. So therefore, it must be the ladies were up front, because what would David be doing in the ladies section? Shenamar's pasuk says, David holich achar hamita. King David was going after it. So Amrulo, they said to him, you cannot prove anything from that funeral procession. It was out of the ordinary. Lo haya davar el lefayis es ha'am. David HaMelech's whole purpose in being there was in order to be able to make sure that he was basically being visible and shaking hands and things. He was being political. V'nis paisu, and it worked. Shaya David yotzmi bein hanashim v'nichnas lebein hanashim v'yotzmi bein hanashim v'nichnas lebein hanashim. David went to the men's section, then he went to the ladies section, then he went back to the men's section. David was around. He needed people to see that he was upset and that he was present at the funeral, so that he knew that he did not endorse the killing of Avner. That was the purpose there. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, "Vayedu kol am v'chol Yisrael ki lo hayasamei hamelech lo hamisas Avner." The whole nation realized that it was not from David to kill Avner, so it worked. Darish Rava explains as follows: "My dichsiv the pasuk mean when it says vayavu kol ha'am lehavros es David." So the nation came in order to comfort David. So ksiv lehachros v'karinan lehavros, right? The pasuk is written in Navi with the word lehachros, not lehavros. So batchila, at first, lehachroso. They went to cut him off. They were upset at him. Levasof, and then in the end, lehavruso, that they came and comforted him. They realized that he was going to comfort. Now, it's just interesting to note that if you open your Navi, that kri uksiv is not there. Not quite sure exactly what the answer to that is, but it is not in our modern Nevi'im. It might have been something that was customary in their times, but it doesn't exist in ours.
Wow.
Rav Yehuda and Rav Mipnei Ma Nenash Avner. Why was Avner punished? Because he could have protested when Shaul, the big crime that Shaul, one of the biggest crimes that Shaul committed, is he's chasing David around, and David was hiding in various places. One of the places that David hid and got support was the city of Nov. The city of Nov was full of Kohanim. And David shows up there, and the city of Nov hid him, and they provided him food and sustenance. And Shaul was terribly upset about it. And so,
were the only Kohanim allowed to live in that city?
Yeah, it sounds that way, right? That Kohanim were only in that city, and so Shaul got mad and he had them all executed for being, as we call, morid b'malchus, because they were rebelling against the king. And Avner was the general. He was a trusted officer. He could have protested against that war crime, right? And so he didn't. Therefore, eventually, this was his fate. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Micha v'lo nena. He says, no, he protested, just nobody listened to him, right? I'm not sure if their answer was, if they're answering the fact that he was punished because he didn't protest enough that he wasn't answered. It sounds like he protested and he wasn't listened to, and therefore he was not really punished for that crime. Ushnei mikra echad darsha. They both learn it from the same pasuk. The pasuk says, "Vayekonin hamelech el Avner vayomer hakamos novel yamus." Avner, that when King David was giving a kina, he was lamenting, giving almost like a eulogy for Avner. He said, "Should he die for in vain?" Novel Yamos Avner. Yadecha lo asuros, your hands were not sealed up. V'raglecha lo linechashtim hugshu. He says, your feet were not placed in chains. So why should you be dying like that? You were your hand, and you were not forced into anything. So, man da'amar lo micha, according to the opinion that says he was being punished because he didn't protest. So, hachi kamar, this was what he was saying. Yadecha lo asuros, v'laglecha lo nechashtim hugshu, my tama lo machisa. He says, your hands were not being tied, your legs were not being bound. Why didn't you take the advantage of your position and protest against Shaul's crime? Kinafel lifnei b'nei avla nafalta. It's as though you have fallen before those that are sinners. Uman damar micha, according to the opinion that says that he did protest, he wasn't listening. Ismahuye masma. This was a astonished comment. Hakemos novel yamus. He says, why should you die for nothing, in vain? After all, you didn't act as though your hands were tied and your feet were tied up. You protested. So my time a kanofel live lifnei b'nei avlo nafalta. He says, after all, you did everything you were supposed to do. You protested. What is the reason why you should have received this punishment? It's almost like it was undeserved. It was a rhetorical question, saying, why did you receive this undeserved punishment? Leman damar micha, my tami yonish. According to the opinion that says that he did protest, so then what was the rationale behind the punishment, right? According to the opinion that says he didn't protest, we got it. But according to the opinion that says he did protest, so then why does he get a punishment? Amar Rav Nachman, Yitzchak The answer is, Reb Nachman Rabbi Yitzchak answers, because he delayed the coming of the kingdom of David for 2.5 years. Because David Melech was king for 7.5 years before he became king over everybody. He was king for 7.5 years. The first 7.5 years, he was only king of Yehuda. There was no king in Yisrael. But then eventually, Avner was instrumental in reinstituting a lineage from Shaul, which he shouldn't have done. That extra delay of 2.5 years was totally Avner's fault. Right? So therefore, if it was totally Avner's fault, so then he deserves to be punished for delaying the eventual Malchus based David. That's why he died. Okay, so now, so when they are comforting him, so the king is supposed to sit on a dargesh. So the question that we need to know is, my dargesh, what is a dargesh? Right? What is that he's sitting on? So Amar Ula says, Arsa de Goda. He says what it is he says it's a leather bed, right? No, he says no. It is a good luck bed. It's a good luck bed. When I have a good luck bed, what's a good luck bed? Good luck bed is, as everybody knows, in your house you have one bed that nobody sleeps on, and you have it around just for good luck. Why do you have such a thing? So the Rashi says that it is a good omen to have such a thing. But other Mefarshim explain, because what do you mean, good omens? Good omens are not something that we Jews believe in, right? So the answer is, it is a sign of having plenty. Here's a bed that we have so much abundance of things that we have a bed that nobody even stays in. It's the extra room, nobody even stays in it. That shows how well off we are, right? So that's what that was. Now, nobody is staying on it, that's why the king is able to stay on that bed. It's a change in the normal routine. Amalei Rabbanan le'ula, Rabbanan said to Ula, mi ika midi da'ad ha'idna lo os vine v'hashta mos vinan le. He says, what are you talking about? He's in mourning. So now we're going to give him something new that he never tried before. Why should he be elevated to have the item that he never used before? All of a sudden he's allowed to use it. So Maskiflo Rava. So Rava asked in my kusha, what kind of question is that? It's the exact same thing. There are lots of things when it comes customary to mourning that are different about the week of mourning that are different than the regular way you live. Like eating and drinking. Hashta because up until this point, right, he's not able to eat and drink other people's food, and now other people are eating and feeding him, right? That's the custom in the mourner's household, is that we bring food and drink from other people to give to him. So you see, it's things that weren't done before can be done once you get to a mourner's household. So what would be the problem with that? Ella, so rather, ikasha hakasha. If you have a question, this should be your question. Dargosh eino tzorich lichafoso. Ella zokfo. So the where did that come from? Who says that? Is it a Brisa or a Mishnah? He says, it's just a memra, just a statement from the Ula, I guess, or what they had, that when it comes to a dargish, whatever this dargish was, this dargish was, doesn't need to be turned over. You just have to stand it up straight. Now, what we had, they used to have a custom in mourning that all of the beds of the house got turned over, right? Just like you sit on low chairs. One of the morning, because we don't do that anymore, but they would take the beds and they would flip them upside down and it would sleep on an overturned, you would have an overturned bed. But when it comes to the dargush, you don't have to overturn it. Rather, you just turn it straight. And I guess I'm imagining that if you've got a bed that's like this, right? So this is your bed. So instead of turning it over like that, you've got your bed. Let's just lean it up against the wall like this. So that way it's out of the way, right? And you're
like a Murphy bed.
Right, that's what it's like a Murphy bed. That's what it sounds like to me, what's going on. I understand you have to try to figure out exactly what's going on. You have to use your 3D mind in order to figure out what the words of the Gemara, your 2D Gemara into 3D. But yeah, it sounds like that's what's happening.
So the king is meant to sleep against the wall?
No, the king, so this is for, in a normal person's circumstance, that bed needs to get stood up against the wall. The king can use it to sit on. Right? The king was allowed to use it to sit on. That's the distinction. This is for normal people. That's a good point. Now, if this is the bed that is for good luck, so then why doesn't he have to turn it over? It's like a bed. It's a bed like any other bed. All beds have to get turned over. So therefore, if you're translating this as the bed of good fortune, so then why are we not flipping it? Just why is it being stood up against the wall? Vatanya, we learned in a brisa, hakofas mitaso, somebody who flips over his bed, lo mitaso bilvadu kofi. You think, well, maybe only the mourner has to flip over his own bed. Not true. He doesn't only flip over his own bed. Ela kol mitos sheyesh lo b'toch beso hu kofi. He's got to flip over every bed in the house. Got to turn over everything. My kusha. So what is the question? So dilma midi havamita miyuchedes lekelim. Maybe the reason why that is the case is because this bed is different than regular beds, because it follows the same rules as a bed which is used only to hold utensils. Everybody's got that junk drawer where you don't use it for that, you don't use it for the silver or whatever, but you throw every piece of junk. This was like, my dining room table during the week. We come in and we put everything on top of the dining room. You have to clean it off for Shabbos, but otherwise there's everything piles up there. So,
cleaning it up for Shabbos is a big job, isn't it? Over there?
That is correct. So therefore, when you've got this bed, this is the bed that you just use to hold stuff. So it's not really the bed that you sleep on, therefore it's kind of like a table, therefore there was no need to actually flip it over. Diktani, as we learned, if you have a bed that is utilized for holding utensils, so you don't have to turn it over. Ella, so rather, ikusha hakasha. So forget that wasn't the question either. So this is the question. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, dargesh matir karvitin vehunofa meirav. When it comes to a dargesh, well, you don't have to turn it over. All you got to do is undo the loops and let it fall to the ground. Now, I was going to try to draw a picture of what this looks like. I would like you to imagine, right? Not quite sure how exactly to do it, but we'll try, okay? Imagine you've got this bed like this, okay? It's got, right? Does that look sort of like a bed? Okay. So now, you've got this bed frame, and you've got to put a bed across, you got to have some material over the middle of it. So what you've got is something that is connected. You've got to have some material that connects on this side and on this side. So you basically have to tie the material on one end and on the other end. There were loops on this dargesh material so that you undid the loops, and then this material would just flop on the floor underneath it.
Same material, I mean like a pillow type of material or a different type of material?
So it's going to come out that it's like leather kind of material. You basically had a big pad of leather, and then you would untie it, and then it just flops onto the floor, right? So it just falls through the frame onto the floor. Okay, so that's what you got to do. If you're telling me that this is this bed that was used for good fortune, karvita misle, there's no loops on such a bed. That's not how they were made. So a regular bed was made by tying the ropes around the frame rather than looping, tying the mattress material to the inside of the frame. So therefore, there's no such loops on such a bed, so therefore that can't be what we're describing. So whatever this dargish is, we haven't described it yet. So we're still trying to figure out what that is. He said to me, it was one of the rabbis, and it was Rav Tachifa, by the way. He was in the Gildayin marketplace. And he said, my dargish. They said, what is this dargish? And I guess because in the market, you go and ask the places where people are selling the things. What is it? Arsa dit salah. He says what it is. It was a leather bed. That was what I was describing, right? It's some kind of bed where the top of the bed was made out of leather. So that's what was going on there. Dargish sirugo mitocho. When it comes to the dargish, the loops, the ties, are on the inside of the bed. Mita, but by contrast, a regular bed, siruga me al gaba, the loops went around the outside of the bed, right? I guess that they would tie the bed mattress and then loop around the outside of the frame, right? That's not a great picture, but it'll do, right? Loop the outside of the bed. It's not practical. If anybody's going to start unlooping your bed when you get home, don't. Okay? So, meisve. So he asked the following question. Kli eitz me'emasam mekablin tuma. At what point is a wood utensil able to receive tuma? Now, when the rule of impurity is that utensils can receive impurity, once that utensil is considered complete, once it is a finished product, then it falls under the category of utensil, and then it is eligible for the rules of purity and impurity. So, what point, we're asking basically, what is the point at which wood utensils are considered to be finished? So, he says, Hamita v'arisa misha yeshufam be'oradag. When it comes to a bed and a arisa, which is a crib, a arisa, like a baby's bed. So from the time that you sand it with the, sorry, I should say chafam base. I should have said that. Thank you. So Yehuda getting up and remind me. Okay, good. Chafam base, right? When you start to sand it with the skin of a fish. And I listened to my history of Daf Yomi History podcast and found out that they in fact talked about that there was something called a cowtail stingray. Cowtail stingray, during that time, they're an endangered species now, but a cowtail stingray native to the Red Sea area apparently has very rough skin and was used in those times as a sandpaper. Right? They didn't have sandpaper, I guess, whatever glue, whatever.
Where's that brutal for the fish, or
it was dead already, I'm sure. Yeah, the fish was already dead, right? They took the fish after, took the skin afterwards. That's correct. That's the old Home Depot, right? So therefore, that's when it's considered done. Once they sanded the wood down and it was finished nicely, that was when it was a utensil. Now, v'imita mesuregas. Now, if you're telling me that the way that a bed works is the loops, the strings go on the outside, why do they bother sanding it? The loops are on the outside, covering the outside of the frame. You don't have exposed wood, so then there's no need to sand the outside. So the answer is shifas or so lamali shifas or dog. Why do you have to sand it? Ella hava hamitocho. Rather, the knot is tied on the inside of a bed and also on a dargesh. Mita aule vafuke bebizione, dargesh aule vafuke beaviksa. He says the difference, though, is that when it comes to the bed, so then it goes through on the inside. You run the rope through holes that are in the length of the bed frame, and when it comes to a dargesh, so then you are going to put the strings through loops that are on the edge of the leather. I do not know what that looks like, but however that is, there's some kind of mechanism that's different that holds the bed together with the string. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yaakov said to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, halach Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. The halach is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Amar Rabbi Yaakov Barami. Rabbi Yaakov Barami says, Mita shenaklita yotzin zokfa vidayo. He says that what you have to do if you are what you have to do is you take the two, I think what he's saying is you take the two pieces of the frame that are lengthwise this way and you lean them up against the wall, and that is sufficient. That is how you are going to put this bed out of the way. You don't actually have to turn it over, you just stand it upright, and then that's going to be considered sufficient. Okay? So that is the end of our dealing with what a dargesh is. Next Mishnah. The king sits on one of those, and they don't, and not while it's standing up against the wall, and not while it's undone, but the king is allowed to sit on one, which is the distinction between the regular mourners who have to not use this dargesh, but a king was allowed to use it.
It's a bed that's slightly different.
Correct. So that way it wasn't like he was sitting on a really nice bed. He was sitting on like a leather mat cot kind of thing. Exactly.
Was it a spring mattress?
They didn't have springs. They didn't have springs.
Unlikely.
Says the Mishnah. Right? The king is able to take the nation out to war based on asking the Sanhedrin of 71. Other rights the king has is he is allowed to break through fences, and it's what do you call it? That eminent domain, right? On behalf, allowed to seize property on behalf of the state, essentially, or himself. Right now, question in the Rishonim about what kind of circumstance we talking about. Are we talking about that he's on his way out to war? And since he's on his way out to war, he can walk through people's fields and take shortcuts and all those kinds of things. Or Rashi seems to imply that he even has the right to be able to make pathways just for his own personal economic, for his own property, right? He's allowed to do that as well. You can't stop him. Derech HaMelech ein lo shiur. If you have the king's road, there's no size. There's no maximum size to the king's road. Well, any size fits the king, right? And the entire nation they're going to when they take spoils of war, so they are going to grab the spoils and then they give it to the king. And he takes a portion first. Okay, so he takes what he wants from their portion, and then they get whatever remains. Okay, so the Gemara, Tanina Chado Zimna. We already learned this idea about the king taking the nation out to war, right? Remember, we talked about the king, and they have to have the Kohen Gadol, and they asked the Urim V'Tumim and the Sanhedrin. Why are we mentioning it again? We said, you're not allowed to go out to battle. LLP based in Shel Shivim Vechad, you need 71 judges. So the answer is, the answer is, you're right. Before we were talking about Sanhedrin rules. Now we're talking about the king, so we'll repeat it again when we're talking about the king. Just saying these are the rules of the king. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says the name of Shmuel, Kol Amar Parshas Melech, Mutter Bo, Rav Amar Lo Nemer Parshazu Ela La'ayim Alehem. He says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, so the Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that everything that in the Torah where it says that a king is allowed to do, it's allowed. He doesn't have to do it. He's allowed to do it. Rav says no, the king has to take an active approach and seize these powers. He has to use them because it's his responsibility to create a fear of the king amongst the people. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, "Som tasim alecha melech." You should place a king upon you. Shetehei emaso alecha. You've got to make that king powerful and on top of you. Ketanai. So this is machlokas tanoim, whether kings are basically an acceptable thing, or are they something that you should have? Rabbi Yossi says, Kol Amar B'Parshas Melech Mutter Bo. Anything that's written in the Torah that a king is allowed to do, that means a king may do it. It's his permission to do, his prerogative. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo Nemer Parshasu Ela Kedei La'ayim Aleim. The whole purpose is to instill fear upon the people. Shneimar pasuk says, "Som tasim alecha melech shtei emasu alecha." The fear should be upon you. V'chein ha'yer Rabbi Yehuda said it also. Gimel mitzvos nitztavo Yisrael b'chnias on la'aretz. The Jewish people, when they came into Israel, had three main mitzvos that they had to do. Lahamid lahem melech. Number one mitzvah is they had to appoint a king. Ulahachris zaro shel Amalek. They had to destroy the nation of Amalek. V'livnos lahem beis ha'bechira, and to build a beis hamikdash. That was the responsibility, right? So therefore, those are positive commandments, Rabbi Yehuda is saying, they actually have to be done, right? It's not, if you want to have a king, you can have a king. No, this is what you got to do. You got to get a king so you can fight Amalek and build a base of Mikdash. Rabbi Norai says, Lo nemar parshazu ela keneged tarumason. No, you know what? The whole reason why they have a king is in order to be able to take care of the complaint the people would have. It's not they needed it, but the people had worries and complaints, and they wanted a king. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, V'amarta asima alay melech. You will say at that point in time, the way that even the pasuk is specified, it says, because you're going to say at that time, I want to have a king, so therefore Hashem says, I will permit you. Tanya, we learn in a brisa. Rabbi Elazar Amar Zikanim she bedor kahogen shalu. When they actually decided that they wanted a king, right? So we had this long period of time, several hundred years, where they were in Eretz Yisrael, they didn't have a king. And the Jew was just like a pattern over and over and over again. The Jewish people would be good for a while, and then they start worshiping Avodah Zarah, and then the nations around them would attack them, and then they would do tshuva, and they'd find a shofet, and they would respond, and they would do tshuva, and they would repel the attack and invaders, and then everything would be good for a while, and then they would start worshiping Avodah Zarah, and it would go around and around and around again. Eventually, the Jewish people said, "We are sick of this cycle. We need a king." Okay, the Zikanim of the generation, they appropriately realized what the problem is and why they needed a king. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, "Tna lanu melech lishaftenu." We need a king in order to judge us. If we start doing the wrong thing, the king will say, "Cut it out," and that will prevent an invasion. However, of Ami Aretz, the unknowledgeable people, Shebahen, that were amongst them, Kilkulu, they messed it up. Shenamar, v'hayinu gam anachnu kechol hagoyim v'shafatnu malkeinu v'yetzi lefanenu. We want a king who's just like all of the other nations, and he's going to take us out to war. And they were mistaken. In other words, we don't want to fix ourselves, but once there's a war, the king will fix that for us, right? They wanted a king for war. So it almost sounds like, right, the Zikanim were smart in that they would prevent the wars in the first place by not doing the wrong thing. And the people were like, of course we're going to do the wrong thing. We don't want somebody involved in our business. Once there's a war, then we want somebody who can fight that war for us. Okay, Tanya. We learned in the Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi says, "Shos mitzvos nitzavos Yisrael b'chnisus l'Aretz." There were three mitzvos. Rabbi Yossi said were the commandments the Jewish people had when they got into Eretz Yisrael. Lahamid lahem melech. They had to put a king. V'achris zaro shel Amalek. They had to destroy Amalek. V'livnos lahem beis ha'bechira, and to build a beis hamikdash. Ve'eni yodea ezim hen tchila. They don't know. We don't necessarily know which one has to go first. Keshu Omer. Therefore, it says ki yad al kes ka milchamala Hashem ba'Amalek. It says that the name of Hashem, right? That you should put a hand on the chair of Hashem for war for Hashem with Amalek. Havyomer lami lahem melech tchila. You got to put a king in the chair, right? The king has got to be there. You got to put a throne up in order to be able to make a king. There's no such thing as a chair without a king, right? The pasuk says, "Vayishiv Shlomo kisei Hashem lamelech." So therefore, you need to have a chair so that the king is in it, and then once the chair is filled with a king, then you can go fight Amalek. Still, okay, you got a king. So what comes first? Build the base of Migdash or destroy Amalek? We still know which one comes first. Keshomer,
I would say destroy Amalek.
Well, let's see. The pasuk does too. The pasuk says Keshomer when the pasuk says that once you have been rested from all of your enemies, and it will be the place where Hashem chooses. You got to get rid of Amalek first. V'chein be David hu omer. Same thing. We see that by David. This is how it worked. Vayiki yeshav Melech David bebeso. Once David Melech had fought all the wars, now David is sitting in his palace. V'Hashem iniach lo misaviv, and Hashem has let him rest from everything that was around him. Uksiv. Then David says, "Hey, you know what's next? Got to build a base of Migdash." Vayomer Melech el Nasan Navi. David Melech calls over Nasan, the prophet, and he says to him, Re'ani Yoshev Beis HaRazim, look, I'm in a cedar home here, and I think I want to build the base of Migdash. Of course, Nasan says to David, you're not the right guy. Your son will do it. You're asking properly. You got, the time is now, but you're not the right person for it. You're a person who is involved in war, and the base of Migdash has to be a place of peace. So you're not the right builder, but your son is the right person. At first, Shlomo Melech was king over all the upper regions, meaning in Shemayim and on everything, right? He was in charge of everything. He had the highest levels. Shenemar, as pasuk says, Vayeshev Shlomo al kisei Hashem. Shlomo was on the throne of Hashem. Ulevasof, then Shlomo has some hard times. Malach al tachtonim. He winds up just over the lower, I guess, the people or things. Shenemar, as pasuk says, Kihuro debechol Ever Hanar, right? He was the commander here. He was the one who was the officer on everything that passed over the sea. Mitifsach vad Aza, from the area of Tifsach until Aza. We're going to discuss where those places are. Rav and Shmuel, they have a dispute. What is Tifsach? And where's Aza? We know, of course, Aza is in the news today. So where is Tifsach? Chadam are Tifsach b'sof olam, ve'Aza b'sof olam. One says, one's on one side of the world, one's on the other side of the world. So Shlomo, he wasn't in Shemayim, but at least he ruled everything on the ground here, right? So from one end of the world to the other. V'chadam, the other one says, Tifsach ve'Aza b'hadei hadadei yahavu. They were both right next to each other. Havu yasvi. Shem shemalach al Tifsach ve'Aza kach malach al kolam kulo. And what we're saying is, just like this little small region that Shlomo was king over, Tifsach and Aza, which is a region which was right next to each other, so too that was the level of control he had over all of the kingdom. Because it was hard in those times to have distant control over faraway places, right? There would be, if your kingdom reached into another continent, how are you supposed to go over there and ensure that they're ruling it on your behalf, right? So therefore, but Shlomo Melech had a tight control of the whole world. Ulavasof, but in the end, Lo Malach Ela Al Yisrael. He was not able to retain his control over the whole world, and he wound up only being the king of the Jewish people. Shneimar pasuk says, Ani Koheles, this I am Koheles, Shlomo says, Hayisi Melech Al Yisrael, I am the king of the Jewish people. Ulavasof, and then, further than that, Lo Malach Ela Al Yerushalayim, he wound up being just the king over Yerushalayim. Shenamar, as pasuk says, Divrei Koheles ben David Melech bi Yerushalayim. Ulevasof, and then after that, things are getting harder and harder on him. Lo Malach Ela Al Mitaso, he was only king of his own bed. Shenamar, pasuk says, Hinei Mitaso Sheli Shlomo, this is the bed of Shlomo. Ulevasof, furthermore, Lo Malach Ela Al Makalo, he was only in charge of his own staff. Shenamar Zehaya Chelki Mikol Amalei, this is all I have left for all of my hard work. That's all I'm in charge of. Then there's discussion in Maseches Gittin that talks all about his Shlomo Melech's fighting with Ashmedai, the king of the demons, and how he winds up getting cast out and thrown away, and he has to live not being the king for a while, and nobody knows who he is and recognize him. That's in Maseches Gittin, very interesting story there. And that's when he has nothing. So the question that comes out of that Gemara is it's unclear whether Shlomo Melech rises back to power or whether that's the way it ends for him, right? So we will leave that unclear because the Gemara there leaves it unclear. We have to wait till Gittin, that's correct. So we're at least 5.5 years to go till Gittin, yeah.
On page
Rav Shmuel, Chad Amar Makalo, V'Chad Amar Gondo. Rav Shmuel have an argument. One said he was still in charge of his staff. One says he was still in charge of his cloak. Hadar or lo Hadar? Sorry, it was right here. So, did he get back or not? Rav Shmuel, this is the argument, they bring it here. Chad Amar Hadar, V'Chad Amar lo Hadar. One says that he did come back, one says he did Manda Amar lo Hadar, one says he never came back. It says Melech V'Hedyot, that he was the king, and then he became just a regular person. Manda Amar Hadar, Melech V'Hedyot Melech, that he was the king, then he became lo, and then he became the king again. Okay, Poritz Lasos Lo Derech. The king is allowed to make to run through people's property in order to make the king's road. Tana Rabbanan. A rabbis learn. Ultros Malachim Lemelech. Right, that when a king goes to war against another country and they attack and take over the other country has a treasury. The king takes the treasury from that other country. The rest of the spoils get split between the king and the people.
What do you mean the spoils? Like,
spoils is whatever you captured during battle.
Like gold, silver,
correct, food or whatever it is. So the people, the army, and the king, the people and the king get to split it. Amar le Abayi Rav Dimi. So Abayi says Rav Dimi. Vamri lo Rav Acha. Some says Rav Acha. Bishlama utros malachim lemelech urcha demilsa. That makes sense that the king gets the treasury. You're the king. Your country takes over the other country. You take their treasury. That makes sense. El shar biza shebozin mechzel melech mechzel aminolan. How do we know that the rest of the spoils get split 50-50? Dichsiv, as it says on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, Vayim Shechula Hashem lenogid v'latzadok. So they anointed him by Shlomo to the nogid is to be the leader. They anointed Shlomo to be the leader, and also Tzadok, who was the Kohen Gadol. Why are we connecting these two characters? Makish nogid litzadok. The ruler and Tzadok are connected. Ma Tzadok mechzolo mechzola achiv. Just like the Kohen Gadol, when he takes the lechem upon him at the end of the week, he gets 6, and the rest of the whole shift of the Kohanim split the other 6. So it's 50-50. So af nagid mechzolo mechzola achiv. That is the source for the king taking half of the spoils and the rest of the people getting the other half. The Tzadok gufei minol. And how do you know the Kohen Gadol himself takes 50% or not? The Tanya, we're going to brisa. Rabbi says, "V'haisela Aaron levanov, mechzel Aaron mechzel levanov." This was to Aaron and his children, half to Aaron and half to his children. Next Mishnah, lo yarbe lo noshim. You're not allowed. King can't have too many wives. So how many is that? Ela shmonas, right? Just 18. No more. Okay. Sorry for the limit. Rabbi Yehuda says, Marbehulo, he can have many, misiros es libo, as long as the wives don't change him, right? He doesn't give his heart over to them. Why? Because a king can be involved in treaty marriages, right? So in that circumstance, that's not a problem. Rabbi Shimon says, Afilu achas misiros libo, if he's got one wife who turns him in the wrong direction, that for sure he can't do. Im Kain, so if that, Lama Nemar Lo Yarbe Lo Noshim, what is the purpose of the pasuk that says you can't have too many wives? Dafilu Kavigayil, even if you have good wives, can't have more than 18. It's a bad idea. Says the Gemara, L'meimra Rabbi Yehuda Darish Taima Dekra. It seems here that Rabbi Yehuda is the opinion who's learning, as we had discussed before, this concept of the rationale behind the psukim. Right? Because the pasuk says, don't have too many wives. Why? Because they might turn your heart astray. Rabbi Yehuda says that as long as they don't turn your heart astray, then you're okay.
Wouldn't 18 also still be a lot of wives?
It would still be a lot of wives. I'm sure it's a lot of work. It's a lot of anniversaries and birthdays to remember. It's not going to be easy, yeah. So now, Rabbi Shimon, lo dorish time to Rabbi Shimon is the one who holds that you don't learn the reasons behind the psukim, because he says regardless you can't have more than 18 wives. Doesn't matter whether they are good or they're bad. But we know that those opinions are reversed. Tanya, we're going to brisa. Almana, when it comes to a widow, Bain Shiz, we discussed this. Almana Bain Shi Ania Bain Shi Ashira. When it comes to a widow, whether she's rich or whether she's poor, Ein Memashkin in Osa, you're not allowed to take a collateral for the loan that you have from her, right? So she owes you money, and her husband is deceased. You cannot come and take a collateral. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, Lo Sachbol Beged Almana. You're not allowed to collect a garment from a widow. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. It is irrelevant what the rationale behind that is. It doesn't matter. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't care what the reason is. Rabbi Shimon says no. Ashira Mamashkin Osa. You can collect a garment from a rich widow. Ania. ein memashkinosa, but not from a poor widow. Why? V'atachayev lahachzir lo, because the pasuk says that you're obligated to return that garment to the widow when she needs it if she's poor. V'atamasiya shemra bishchunasei. And if you're coming there in the morning to collect the garment, you're coming back at night to return it to her, everybody's to say, hey, this guy hangs around this widow way too much. And it's going to be...
Maybe that's the only garment she has since she's poor.
That is exactly right. So therefore, you've got to return it. So if that's the case, people will start saying negative things about her reputation, and therefore that's why you don't collect a garment from a widow. Vamrinan. Now we say, my kamer, what is going on here? Hachi kamer, this is what's going on. Mitoksha ta memashkina, since you are collecting this garment, atachayv lahachzir lo, you're going to have to be able to return it. V'tamasiya shemra bishkunasei, and now you're going to give her a bad name amongst her neighbors. Alma, that is to say, Rabbi Yehuda lo darish time to Rabbi Yehuda says, doesn't matter what the reason is. Whether she's rich or poor, you can't get it because that's what the pasuk says. Rabbi Shimon darish time to and Rabbi Shimon says, no, it depends. If she's rich, then you don't have to worry about it. You can collect the item. So therefore, Rabbi Shimon says the rationale behind the reason for the mitzvah makes all the difference. So the answer is, Rabbi Yehuda, so Bialma, the answer is in the general principle of things, Rabbi Yehuda lo darish time mikra. Rabbi Yehuda does not generally learn the rationale behind the reasons for the mitzvos. V'shani hacha, but here it's different. De mefaresh taima dikra. Here, the pasuk tells you the reason. In the pasuk, when it comes, don't take the garment for the woman, it doesn't tell you the reason. So you don't investigate what the reason. It doesn't matter what the reason is. But here, the pasuk tells you the reason. The pasuk says, don't, because the wife is going to bring you astray. Ma tam lo yarba lo nashim. Why is it that you shouldn't have too many wives? Mishum de lo yasar livavo, because you should not turn your heart astray. Rabbi Shimon says, Amar lach. Look, let's take a look. Michti. Let's take a look at what's going on here. Bialma darshinan time ikra. Generally speaking, we do look into the rationale behind the pasuk. Im kain, if that's true, lichtov tor lo yarba lo nashim v'lishtok. The pasuk all has to say is don't have too many wives, and it doesn't have to give me the reason because I'd figure out the reason myself, and then I'd apply the reason. I don't need the pasuk to tell me the reason. So therefore, v'anamina matama. What do I would say it myself. What is the reason? Lo yarba. Why do you can't have too many wives? Bishum de lo yasur, because you don't want to turn astray. Lo yasur lama li afilachas. So he says lo yasur. Why does this have to say that don't turn away? It's to tell me this is where Rabbi Shimon says you're right. Generally speaking, you learn Tamid Akra, but I wouldn't need to write the reason in. Therefore, since the pasuk is writing the reason in, I have to go one step further. And I have to say, why do I have this pasuk says you should turn away? Because that you should turn away your heart, to tell me that even one, I can't have 18, that doesn't have to do with turning away. It's that even if I have one that turns away my heart, so then Mesiris Levo Harezu Lo Yasin, then you can't marry her. You can't marry her. Ve'ela ma'ani mekayim lo yarbe dafilu kavigayo. So therefore, the pasuk is telling me that why you can't have too many. That's even if the reason doesn't apply, which is the opposite of what Rabbi Shimon normally says. But he has to say that because he wouldn't need you to write the Dorish Tamid Akra because he normally learns that anyway. Does that make sense? I want to make one point, as we've been going through many of these Gemaras and we have stories and things in it, that I don't know if I saw it anywhere other than people have pointed out to me. You can tell if it's going to be an exciting page of Gemara by the shape of the words on the page, right? If you have a page that has skinny, gets wider, and then gets wider still, that is a page of Gemara that's going to have a Agadata on it. Agadata is the type of Gemara that has stories and things on it. If you have a page that is straight or straight with just one wider section of it, then that is going to be a section which does not have a Agadata on it. So you can sort of know whether you're getting into exciting things or not right as soon as you get to look at the page. That's just a little Gemara inside tip. Okay, get to keep that one for me. Now, Hani Shmona Asrei Minolan. Why 18? Where did we get this number 18 from? Where 18 was from? Dichsiv, the pasuk says, David HaMelech. Vayoldu leDavid banim bechevron. David had children in Chevron. Vayhi bechoro Amnon lachinom. He had son Amnon. That was the bechor. His mother was Achinoam, HaYisraelis. Umishneu, then the second was Kilav Lavigayo, Ashes Novel. And Ashes Novel Carmeli. The Shlishi was Avshalom ben Macha. Varavi Adonia ben Chagis. And the Chamishi was Shvatya bas Avital. And the Shishi Yisram leEgla, Ashes David. Okay? So he's got 6 children from 6 different wives. Eila Yeldu David b'Chevron, those are the ones that he had in Chevron. The Kamar le Navi. Now, when David HaMelech is looking for marrying Bathsheba. So the Nasan and Navi comes and rebukes David and says, why do you need more wives? right? Ima'at, if you've got too few wives, v'osifalach kahina v'chena. You can have more like wives like these and another more wives like these. So kahina, when he says wives like these, you've got 6. So another set of wives like these makes another 6. That's shis. Ve'kahina, and another set after that is another shis. Dehavule timnei Yisrael. That's where we get 18 from, right? He had 6, and Dawson told him you can have 6 more and another 6. Therefore, that would make 18. Maskif Ravina. Ravina says, hey, if that's how you're learning it, I got some questions. Ema kahina tartisrei. Now you got up to the first kahina, another that's going to add another 6 on. You're up to 12. Vechahina, and then you add on another. You're doubling what you have so far. So therefore, you should come up to Esrim Varba. You should be at 24, right? 6 plus 6, you get up to 12. You double 6, you get to 12. Then you double 12, you get to 24. Tanya Nami Hachli, we have a brisa that actually supports that view. Lo yaber lo nashim, you can't have more women, we can't have more wives. Yoser mi Esrim Varba, more than 24. Laman dedarish vav. And according to the opinion, there are those that think that when you've got an extra vav in a pasuk, you're supposed to go even further. You're adding an extra drasha for that, and then you're going to get up to 40 mishmona. It's going to be 48 wives, right? Because you can double again. Right. So it's kahena gets me to 12, ve gets me to 24, kahena gets me to 48. So that's what I'm saying. Tanya Nami Yochiv Brisa that supports that opinion as well. Lo yarba lo noshim, yoser me arbaim ushmona can have more than 48 wives. Right. Normally we stick with the Mishnah and say 18. Right. That is the common understanding.
Solomon's math was a bit off, though, right?
Solomon had way too many. Right. But he was Dorish. He was holding like Rabbi Yehuda that if he thought that they wouldn't take him astray, then he could. The problem was they did take him astray, right? That was the problem with I don't want to get into it because someone's going to say it in a minute.
Again, the Mishnah says less than 18. What does the Mishnah say?
The Mishnah says 18.
And the Gemara?
Right? The Gemara says 24 potentially and potentially 48. Right? The Bryces.
Based on this?
Based on the understanding of how to interpret this pasuk, kahina v'chahina. Right? So that's all that word comes from. Vatana didon, my tame. Now what is the rationale behind our Tana, Amar of Kana? Makish kahina, basur kahina kama. The first word kahina works just like the last word kahina. Ma kahina kama shis, just like the first kahina is 6. Af kahina basur, the second kahina is shis, is another 6. Havai Michal. What about Michal? Michal had no kids, right? We're going to explain that in a second. And so he's married to Michal, so she's not listed because this was just listing his kids. And based on his kids, we counted how many wives he had. But Michal got left off the list.
Was Michal cursed?
Yes, so we're going to see that in a moment, that Michal was in fact cursed. And therefore, we should be really saying he had 7 wives, plus another 7 is 14 plus, would have gotten us to 21. Samarav, Agala zu Michal. Agala is Michal, it's the same person. Okay, Agala zu Michal. V'lama nikra Shema Agala, why is she called Agala? As everybody knows, Shechaviva loved Kagala. She was as precious as a calf, as we all call our wives, our precious calves, right? As Mepharshim explained, that is a great term of endearment. Please don't try that at home. That's correct. I will let you know when we get to a Gemara that you can use at home. This one is dangerous. Do not use this one at home. V'chein hu omers. It says also, Lulei charashtim baglasi, right? That you have silenced my calf. Umihavi l'michal bani. Now the problem is that if that is Agala is Michal, she has a son. But Michal shouldn't have any kids, as we just said. Pasuk says, Michal did not have any children ad yom mosa until she died.
Did she adopt a child or whatever?
She did actually, right? We should mention that she did adopt Meirav's children, but that child that's listed is not one of those children. And it sounds like it's hers. So what's going on here? Amar Rav Chisda, so Rav Chisda says, Ad yom mosa lo haya la. The answer is, she didn't have any children until the day she died. But yom mosa haya la, but when the day she died, she did have a child. And therefore that child,
She gave birth when she was dead?
when she was dying, on her deathbed, right? So she died in childbirth. On the day she died. So Mechti, so let's take a look. Banim hecha kachashiv lahu. 1 second, time out. What's the time period that this pasuk is listing the 6 kids of David, right? This is not late in David's life. This is early. This is Bechevron. This is early on in David's life during the first 7.5 years of his reign when he was still in Chevron. Vilu Maisa de Michal b'Yerushalayim Hava. This section about Michal, where the Torah tells us, where the pasuk tells us that she is cursed, happens in Yerushalayim later on. When does this happen? What happens is, the pasuk says,
What did she do to get her?
great question. Michal Bashal, Nishkifa Bar Chalon, Michal, the daughter of Shaul, was leaning out the window. Vateres HaMelech David, Mefazes Mecharkev Fnei Hashem. And she saw David HaMelech was dancing up a storm. What was happening is that they were celebrating because they were moving the Aron Kodesh into Yerushalayim, and they were all excited about it. David HaMelech was dancing and dancing in front of the Aron Kodesh and making a whole big to-do about it. And Michal looked out the window, Vatavos, and she thought it was an embarrassment. That is not how her father, the king, would have ever behaved. David was getting way too
excited.
Outside of the she felt it was outside of the dignity of the monarchy for the king to be acting that way. And she told David, and she acted that way. David told her off, so that is not correct. You don't understand that the king serves the Torah and serves Hashem. And so therefore there's nothing higher than that, so that for the king to be celebrating that is completely appropriate.
And basically she judged the book by its cover when she shouldn't have done.
And therefore she got cursed, and she had no children until the day she died. Okay? V'amar Rav Yehuda, v'yitem Rav Yosef, shekolsa Michal lemitarfasa. So he says that
how to serve God with his derech, the tikkun amidus, and
Michal took the payment for her avera. That's what she took payment for her avera, and she didn't have any children. Now, this pasuk, if Agola is Michal and that's really her child, happened before this occurred. So if the pasuk says she had no children, so then she should have had no children up until this point, until the day she died. So how does she have a kid? The child was not cursed. No, we wouldn't punish the child because the mother did the wrong thing. Now, Ella, Ema ad oso maisa hayallah. Kaman ve'elach lo hayallah. The answer is, what we have to explain is she had kids before this incident. It was from this incident on that she got cursed. She could have no more kids. That's what was going on. V'aksiv, the pasuk says, "V'yikach David od pilag shim v'nashim b'Yerushalayim lemeluyei shmonasar." But it says David took more wives and pilag shim are translates concubines. I don't know what the English word concubine means, but for halachic purposes, a pilegesh is a woman who is married without a ksuba. She's married like someone.
Kid before she was cursed.
She had a kid before she was cursed, and then she did not have after.
We're doing here about her kids.
In this pasuk that we said, the number of the 6 children of David from Chevron, and one was the child of Agola, and we said Agola is Michal. Okay, so now, so that was to fill up the 8. So the answer is to fill up the 18. So my noshim umay pilagshim. So this is what is the difference between wives and pilagshim, as we just said. Amar Yehuda, Amar Rav, Noshim b'ksuba v'kiddushin, pilagshim below ksuba below kiddushin. Rav says that wives are those that get married, that they're married with ksuba and with kiddushin, and pilagshim have no ksuba and no kiddushin.
Kiddushin, which was like the
marriage process, right? So they didn't give her a ring and say you're married, but they were in fact they were legal wives without a ksuba. Okay.
Well, I guess left, there's no sort of get or anything like that.
That is questionable, right? It was all depend on it. Actually, this idea of whether there's no kiddushin or whether there is kiddushin is a machlokas rishonim as well. Let's see. He says let's say kiddushin, chavtas. If I recall, this is what we said.
and of course,
Right. The Rambam says that she's miyuchedes li'isha echad. Whether she needs a get or not is. Chlokas, Regilos, Heim below Ksuba. That is according to Rashi in Perush Torah, says that the difference between Pilagshim and Noshim is that there's no Ksuba, but there is Kiddushin. And if that is the case, then she would probably need a get. But according to the opinion that she's just miyachi to one man, when no Kiddushin is necessary, as it sounds like the Gemara is saying here, probably a get would not be necessary. Okay, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, we said the name of Rav. Arba meos Yelodim Hayulu David. David had 400 kids. The Kula and Bnei Yifas Toar Hayu. All of those children were the children of women that David captured in battle. Right? The Torah tells us that if you go out to battle, so then you find a woman that's there, so you take her home, and she stays in your house for a month, and she cries, and she doesn't want to go. She wants to go home, and
safe house.
she's unsafe. It's her unsafe house, right? She wants to go home, And then after you let her do that for a while, then you can have relations with her. And then if you want to marry her, then you can keep her. But you have relations with her once. Now, then they're not converted, right? So he had 400 children because he fought so many battles and wars. He had so many circumstances like that he had 400 children from those circumstances. Umegadle blurios hayu. They had long hair in the back, some kind of ponytail or something. That was their trademark haircut. The kulan yoshvin bekronos shel zahav, and they all sat on gold, I believe it's chariots.
The world's
Carriages, okay, good. Umehalchim baroshe gaisos. They would go in the front of the troops. V'heim hayu bali agrofin shel beis David, and they were known as the fists of David's army. Meaning these were the tough guys. They had this special haircut. They ride on chariots, led the army and the soldiers. These were David's soldiers.
They were like a biker gang, but
They were they were like the David's biker gang. So V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Lahavdil. Rav Yehuda said of Rav, Tamar bas Yifas Torah haisa. Tamar, one of David's daughters in the story, was the daughter of a Yifas Torah. Shinamar, how do we know that? Because the pasuk says, "V'atada berna hamelech ki lo yimnaeni mimcha." What happened was Amnon, who was the older child of David, got a crush on Tamar, his sister. And so he is going after her, and she gives him the advice, why don't you just go ask Dad if you can marry me, and that will be fine. So, if she was from a regular wife, why would she say that? She's his sister. How can she get married to her brother? You can see from here, Bas Yifas Torah, she was the daughter of Yifas Torah. Hence, she was not Jewish, and she converted. And because her mother was Jewish, so she was not Jewish, she converted. She's not related to her brother. That's why she could marry Amnon. And that was why that was acceptable. We could stop here.